A silver storm of cinematic excellence is heading your way, bringing a flood of new perspectives and raw emotions. Brace yourself for the impact of stories that hit like lightning and linger like thunder. Subscribe today and ride the storm of great storytelling with us right now.
The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen table for 3 days before my mother finally admitted what was inside it. I noticed it the morning after my grandmother's funeral. A standard white envelope, the kind banks use when they want to look official. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's handwriting, that careful, slightly shaky cursive she'd developed in the last 2 years when her hands weren't what they used to be. I reached for it. My mother's hand came down on it first. "That's nothing," she said. "Estate paperwork. I'll handle it." I was 31 years old. I had a master's degree in forensic accounting. I had spent the previous 6 years helping federal prosecutors follow money through shell companies' falsified ledgers and offshore accounts, and my mother was telling me that an envelope with my name on it, in my dead grandmother's handwriting, was nothing. I let her keep it, not because I believed her, but because I had learned a long time ago that when you suspect someone of taking something that doesn't belong to them, you don't tip them off. You build the case first. My grandmother had raised me. That's the part people don't understand when I explain what happened. My parents didn't abandon me, exactly. They were just always somewhere else. My father's somewhere else was a series of business ventures that never quite launched. My mother's somewhere else was whatever version of social life required her to be unavailable. I spent most of my childhood at my grandmother's house, a small craftsman in Pasadena with lemon trees in the backyard and bookshelves in every room. She taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 9. She proofread my college essays. She came to my graduate school graduation when my parents sent a card. She died on a Tuesday in late October. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless, the way that particular cancer tends to be. She was 78. She had been lucid until the last 2 weeks. I flew in from DC the day I got the call. My brother flew in from Portland, where he lived with his wife and a lifestyle that cost more than his salary explained. He was 3 years older than me and had never, in my memory, been held accountable for a single thing. The funeral was small. My grandmother had outlived most of her friends. Afterward, we all went back to my parents' house. My grandmother's house had already been listed, which I found out reading a real estate app the morning of the burial, not from my parents. And that's when I first saw the envelope. 3 days later, I was still there. I told myself it was grief. It was also surveillance. On the 4th morning, I came downstairs early. My mother was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the envelope open in front of her. When she heard me on the stairs, she folded it closed. Not fast enough. I had seen 2 things in that half second. The first was a check. The second was enough zeros that my brain needed a moment to arrange them correctly. "Mom," I said. "I need to see that. It's complicated." She stood up, took her coffee, moved toward the window. Classic deflection. Put distance between yourself and the thing you're trying to control. Your grandmother's estate is going through probate. There are a lot of pieces to coordinate. The envelope has my name on it. It also involves the whole family. I sat down at the table. I put my hands flat on it, the way I do when I'm in a deposition, and I need to signal that I have more time than the other person. Then explain the pieces to me. What she told me, over the next 20 minutes, was a story I was supposed to find reasonable. My grandmother had written me a check. She said this like it was minor, as a gift to help me get started. But given everything happening with my brother, given that he was dealing with some financial pressures, given that the family needed to stay together right now of all times, it made sense for me to sign the check over, just temporarily, until things stabilized. My brother would pay me back. He always intended to pay people back. I asked how much the check was for. My mother looked at the window. $600,000. The silence in that kitchen was very loud. My grandmother had sold a property she'd owned for 40 years the previous spring, a small commercial building she'd inherited from her own mother in a neighborhood that had gone from overlooked to extremely desirable. She had spent the last 7 months of her life deciding what to do with that money, and she had decided to give it to me. She always played favorites, my mother said. And the way she said it, tired, practiced, like she'd been rehearsing, told me she had been planning this conversation for at least 7 months. I said I needed to think. That was day 4. On day 5, I called a friend from law school, who now practiced estate law in California. I described the situation without using names. He described several things to me in return. The legal definition of undue influence, the timeline for contesting a gift made outside of probate, and the particular felony classification that applied to someone who induced another person to sign over a check through coercion or misrepresentation. I thanked him. I did not tell him what I was about to do. On day 6, my brother arrived in the kitchen while I was making coffee, and sat down heavily in a chair. He had the look he'd had since childhood when he wanted something, slightly aggrieved, as if the thing he wanted had already been unfairly withheld. "Mom told me she talked to you," he said. "She did look He rubbed his face. I know this is a bad situation. I know the timing is terrible. But I'm in a position right now where, if I don't handle this debt in the next couple weeks, it gets worse. And I mean significantly worse. I poured my coffee. What kind of debt? He was quiet for a moment. Business debt. This was the kind of answer that in my line of work meant the opposite of what it said. Business debt, spoken the way he said it, carefully, without specifics, usually meant the business in question was not a registered entity, and the people owed were not the kind who sent collection letters. How much? I asked. He told me. It was a number that explained several things about the last 2 years of his life, including why his wife had started driving a different car, and why they'd quietly stopped talking about the house renovation they'd announced at Christmas. I'm sorry you're dealing with that, I said. I really am, but that's not something I can fix by signing over money my grandmother left me. What happened next is the part I still go over sometimes late at night, not with regret, but with a specific cold clarity. My brother looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "You don't have a choice." I asked him what he meant. He meant that he and my mother had already spoken to an attorney, his word, who believed there were grounds to challenge the gift. That my grandmother had not been fully competent in her final months, that there was documentation suggesting undue influence, that I was the one who had been with her most often, that I was the one she'd spoken to alone, repeatedly, in the weeks before she died. He meant that if I didn't sign the check, they were going to report me to the State Bar Association for elder financial abuse. He meant that my employer, I worked as a contractor for a federal agency, would receive a formal complaint. He meant that my grandmother's doctor, who apparently owed my father a favor of some kind, was prepared to provide a statement about her cognitive state. He said all of this in the flat, rehearsed way that told me my mother was in the next room listening. When I go back to that moment, here is what I know about myself. I did not panic. I have been trained, professionally and by a childhood that required it, not to show what I'm actually doing. When I'm afraid, I get still. When I'm threatened, I get methodical. What I actually felt in that kitchen was something cleaner than fear. It was recognition. It was recognition. I had sat across from people like this in professional settings. People who had done something they shouldn't have, and then constructed a story to make the victim the aggressor. The story is always tailored to the victim's specific vulnerabilities. Mine were professional reputation and institutional trust. It was actually, I thought, fairly well researched. Okay, I said. Let me think about it. My brother visibly relaxed. This is the thing about people who operate on entitlement. They believe that resistance is temporary, that eventually the other person will understand their role. I went upstairs and I made 4 phone calls. The first was to the estate attorney I'd consulted the day before. I told him I was ready to retain him formally. The second was to the bank. My grandmother had made the check out to me 8 weeks before she died. I had the check number, the account number, and my own name on the payee line. I asked about the process for deposits involving gifted funds from a deceased account holder. The conversation took 11 minutes. At the end of it, I knew 2 things I hadn't known before. The third call was to my grandmother's primary physician. Not the doctor my father apparently knew, her actual doctor, Dr. Elaine Whitmore, who had treated her for 9 years, and who had, as it turned out, documented their last 3 appointments with particular care, because she had anticipated exactly this kind of dispute. My grandmother had been cognitively intact. The documentation said so explicitly. My grandmother had also told Dr. Whitmore in October that she was concerned her son and daughter-in-law might attempt to interfere with a gift she intended to make. Dr. Whitmore had made a note of that too. The fourth call was to a colleague at work who specialized in financial forensics and had once, over too much coffee, explained to me how to document a pattern of economic coercion in a way that was admissible in civil proceedings. That night, at dinner, I watched my family. My mother was careful and almost kind in the particular way she got when she thought things were going her way. My brother ate fast and didn't look up from his plate. His wife, who had driven in that afternoon, which told me this was now considered urgent, made several comments about family unity that she had clearly practiced. I was pleasant. I asked about their drive. I refilled the water glasses. After dinner, I said I needed some air and went to sit in my grandmother's garden, which no one had touched since she got sick. The lemon trees still had fruit on them. I sat there for an hour, and I thought about every decision point and whether I had missed anything. I had not missed anything. The next morning, my mother came to my room before I was dressed. She sat on the edge of the bed, which she hadn't done since I was a child. And she took my hand, and she told me that she loved me, and that none of this was personal, and that my grandmother had never really understood how hard things were for the rest of the family, and that this was just about survival. I listened to all of it. I did not pull my hand away. Then I said, "Mom, I need you to hear me. If you move forward with any of what was described to me yesterday, I will provide investigators with 3 years of financial records, documenting the money that moved from my grandmother's accounts to yours and Dad's. I have the statements. I've had them since she asked me to review her finances 2 years ago. My mother's hand went still. I'll also provide correspondence, I continued. She sent me emails. Several of them describe specific conversations she had with you about this property and what she intended to do with the proceeds. They are time-stamped. They are in my possession. They are already with my attorney. The room was quiet. The complaint you're planning to file, about elder financial abuse, I said, would trigger an investigation. That investigation would have access to everything I just described. I want you to think carefully about whether that is a process that benefits you. My mother stood up. She didn't say anything. Her face did something complicated, and then closed. She left the room. I got dressed. I went downstairs. My brother was in the kitchen. He looked at me when I walked in, and I looked back at him, and he knew. The way people know when the thing they counted on not being real turns out to be real. She already told me, he said. Good. You had all of that the whole time. I had it the whole time. He sat with that for a moment. The doctor who was going to write the statement, he said finally. He wasn't going to write it. I want you to know that. I don't think he would have actually done it. I poured coffee. I believe you, I said. And I did. The threat had been designed to scare me, not to be executed. Most threats are. The problem is, they don't know that I spend my professional life distinguishing between threats that are real and threats that are performance. My brother had a debt problem that was not going to disappear because my grandmother's money disappeared. I understood that. I also understood that his debt problem was not something I had created, and it was not something I could ethically solve by relinquishing $600,000 that a woman I loved had spent 7 months deciding to give me. I'll call you, I said. When I'm back in DC, we can talk about it when we're not in the middle of all this. He nodded. I don't know if he believed me. I meant it for what that's worth. I left that afternoon. I drove to the bank on my way to the airport. The teller looked at the check for a long time. She excused herself and came back with the branch manager, which I had expected. A check of that size always escalates. I had my documentation ready. The account was in good standing. The gift had been made outside probate, as permitted by California law. I had the letter from the estate attorney. I had the documentation from Dr. Whitmore. The manager processed the deposit. She was professional and careful, and did not ask me anything she wasn't required to ask. Driving to LAX, I kept thinking about the last real conversation I had with my grandmother. She was in the hospital, 4 days before she died, and I was sitting in the chair next to her bed, and she looked at me for a long time with that specific attention she had always given me. Not performing it, just doing it. And she said, "You've always known how to take care of yourself. I just wanted to make sure you had room to do it." I didn't know then what she meant by room. I thought she meant permission. Now I think she meant the distance you need between yourself and the people who would narrow your life down to what's convenient for them. I've been back in DC for 3 months. My brother is working with a debt restructuring firm. I found this out through his wife, who texted me separately, which I chose to take as its own kind of message. My parents haven't called. I sent them a card at Thanksgiving. It seemed like the right amount. The money is in an account I opened specifically for it. I haven't spent any of it yet. I'm not sure I know how. My grandmother balanced checkbooks when she was 9, because her mother taught her that money was just organized intention. I keep thinking about that. About what I intend. I know what I don't intend. To let what almost happened make me small. To spend the rest of my life being careful in the way my family wanted me to be careful. Careful not to have too much. Careful not to take up too much space. Careful not to want things they hadn't already decided I was allowed to want. My grandmother left me room. I'm going to use it.